Hi everyone, it's the Rangers Review, back to talk tactics. We've been away for a little while, Adam. Quite a lot's happened. Today we are going to talk about how we've got here. Rangers are winless inside 5 games. They could, I believe, in theory, be bottom going into the next Scottish Premiership match day if the teams below them win. I think I might have made that up. But today's going to be less about screen grabs from games and why did this player move here, and a little bit more of a conversation about why has this not worked so spectacularly up until this point. Kind of nosed off what was a brilliant piece, which I will link in the description, from Adam the other day, titled, I think, When Philosophy Meets Pressure. Is that right, Adam? Introduce it for us. Where are you with this all? We're just over a month into the season, and yet somehow Rangers have an end of days feeling associated with them again because of results and performances.
Yeah, it's funny. Not very much has happened, but a lot has happened. Which I guess not very much happening is the problem. Where am I at with it? I think if we go back to the summer, you and I were pretty aligned that attacking possession football is the way to go. And I know people say, "Oh, possession doesn't work up here." Other teams are going to give you the ball. You can't avoid having 65-70% possession. So does it not make more sense to get really good at having the ball than try and give them it back? So that's the logic that I work to, rightly or wrongly. That being said, again, people seem to think possession football is just passing about at the back and there's nothing else there. So in the summer, attacking possession-based football was something I like to see. Russell Martin in his last season at Swansea, first season at Southampton, certainly scored a lot of goals, conceded a lot of goals, and generally played football that I thought might work here. All the other doubts around, that's great having an idea, can you actually execute it when you come into an environment like this or an environment like the Premier League? Do you have the man management? Do you have the character? Do you have the personality to deal with things when things are going tough, deal with difficult decisions, deal with the insane pressure of the club? All of those things were a complete question mark for everyone, and they are just as important, if not more important, than how we play sometimes. So from that basis, I tried to focus on the positives in terms of, we've seen a couple of nice little bits against Pilsen, Panathinaikos, even bits of Motherwell. Scored some goals, seen some nice moves. And then Bruge happened. Now, the writing was on the wall for a lot of people before that, for sure. I don't think I was one of them. I have to say, I was still of the opinion that we need more players in. We still didn't get enough players as far as I'm concerned, which kind of gets overlooked because of the insane amounts of money that we spent. But yeah, that's where I was. After Bruges, I think it's just completely untenable regardless. I think because that was a complete capitulation. It was wild. It could have been 10-0 at the end of that game. So that's kind of where I was. In effect, you're really just hoping for a miracle / biding your time in the next 2 games. What I have been a little bit disappointed in, maybe not so much the Celtic game because that was right after the Bruges game. It's the last game before the break. It's sort of basically, let's not get another tanking, as pathetic as that sounds. I think that was the kind of feeling because of how much of an issue that Bruges game was. So, but coming back, time on the pitch, players there. I know a lot were away on international duty. That's all fine. What I seen against Hearts was unacceptable to me for any type of manager. Far less a manager who comes in and preaches his style, his philosophy. He wants to be aggressive. He wants to do this. He wants to do that. That sort of felt like throwing shit at a wall. And as I sort of said in that article, I'd have a lot more respect if you go down like Ruben Amorim is doing. It's not even a style he's wedded to. It's just a shape, really. But I would have a lot more respect if you go down with that rather than trying to change to something you're not able to coach. You haven't bought the players for. You've not trained it at all. I'm not saying it's completely alien. Some of the principles will still be there, but that to me, if that continues and it's basically just safety first, if you like, with still no cutting edge, then what's the point, really?
Yeah,
That's
yeah. We'll get into that because there's so much to cover, and we'll get to like why is the shape changed subsequently after Bruges? How does the nadir of Bruges compare to like Martin's time at Southampton and the damage that causes? And then you're right, you change shape, and it feels like you then become less dogmatic, but at the wrong time when you need to be more dogmatic less dogmatic at the start and adapt a little bit more to build some momentum and optimism. So loads to get into. The way I've kind of framed it, Adam, is this conversation is more about a look at why it hasn't worked under Martin up until this point in September. Look at how you have protests outside the ground inside 2 months of the season starting. And what I think has been a real demonstration so far of failing to create the right environment across the board, and that comes into recruitment, that comes into the politics, because tactics isn't just about what you do in the pitch, it's how it feeds into the stands, it's all encompassing, it's how the players feel, but how that has failed to create the right environment to allow a bold and quite countercultural idea to work. So we're going to get into all of that. Firstly, let's see, where are Rangers? We covered this on the Rangers review earlier in the week. That's the wrong slide, let me take that back off. But in effect, Adam, underlying numbers can give us a bit of an idea as to if a team are over or underperforming. It's only 5 games into the season, so I'd be reticent to normally use like the expected goals for and against. But I think because of where we are, it's fair enough to maybe not put tons of weight behind it, but just reference the fact that Rangers are yet to score an open play goal. They've all underperformed their expected goals by a couple. I think it's 2 goals from 4.6 XG. But there's 0.91 expected goals per 90, so just the average chance quality per game is almost half of even last season, which was 1.73 expected goals, and that was low. This chart here in front of you is expected goals difference, which is what is the variation between the chances a team are creating and conceding on average. A title-winning team would hope to be at about like 1.5, I think, in the Scottish Premiership. Celtic are still pretty low at 0.9. Rangers are at 0.02. So all that to demonstrate is the fact that although on Saturday against Hearts, again we'll come on to it, I think in isolation Rangers are a bit unlucky, right? Referee calls go against them. They actually did create a little bit when they went to 4-3-3 after the break, but also they probably should have lost against Motherwell in the opening day. They were probably fortunate to draw against Dundee and arguably away at St Mirren too. So that is to just demonstrate that it's not as if you've got these bad results, but under the hood, it's like, I'll just wait, things will turn. As for the reasons we will explore, that is not what the underlying numbers are demonstrating at the moment. There we are. So let's start the conversation with, I think, what Rangers have tried to do. I've got this quote from Miguel Delaney, who I think is a very good journalist. Writes for the Independent in, is it London, the Independent? I think it is. And he's speaking about Ruben Amorim, who again is kind of categorised along with someone like Russell Martin, who is a bit of an ideologue. As we'll come on to, I think the Pepism that gets lodged at people like Russell Martin isn't accurate, because Pep Guardiola is a very adaptable manager. He wins the Manchester derby at the weekend with less than 50% of the ball, with the number 9 of all number 9s in Erling Haaland, with a goalkeeper who was phased out at PSG because he couldn't use the ball with his feet as proactively as they wanted. But he makes small tweaks and adaptations all the time. Okay, so we'll get onto that. But this is what Miguel Delaney says about trying to appoint a philosophy manager. It was written on the pages. I'm cutting that quote. Best practice in the modern game is for a football hierarchy to first decide what their ideology is going to be, with that ideally informed by the history and culture of the DNA of the club. That's really important in relation to this conversation about Martin. I think every single decision should flow from that, from recruitment to coaches. It automatically means clubs don't find themselves in a situation where so much seems to be weighted on one man. United, despite so much talk of a new era, have done the same thing again. They've hired a coach with an extremely defined approach. First, meaning so much is already anchored to that. It would be much better if Amorim came into a squad and at least had previously tactically adaptable players signed to a broader ideal. Adam, I think this relates very much to Rangers, because we spoke a lot last season about the fact that you don't need a Rangers man in the dugout. But any, I think, wise club, if they're going to do something pretty radical, which Rangers have done, in implementing a style that this crowd hasn't really seen before, you either need to drip feed it in, you need to be perfect at it, and kind of get everything right. Otherwise, you need to give some due diligence and consideration to how difficult this will be to implement culturally. And to throw one more quote at you, which is from me, but I'm also quoting you, so it's not too embarrassing. This is something I wrote about Martin recently, and it was actually using the frame of Graham Souness in 1986, saying that it's difficult for the crowd to have this slower build-up that he brought from Liverpool, but I'm going to do it because it's my idea, right? He arguably had a bit more weight behind him to implement that. I said Rangers as a club are in culture shock. Many from the previous ownership regime, drawn parallels to Man United's long walk in the wilderness in recent years, a club that should win but can't see the forest from the trees, trying to become winners again. It was striking watching their meeting with Arsenal at the weekend, how quickly and directly they played forward, how well the crowd responded to that, and the energy the players offered. There's an impatience at clubs like this, Rangers and Man United, that bleeds from the stands onto the pitch. Goals should have come 5 minutes ago and trophies yesterday. Tactics are all encompassing, and this is the environment Martin is operating within. The reason I bring up both of those quotes is it feels to me as if Rangers have been too much like, this is what Martin's best practice football looks like. We're going to get there, and until then, just stick it out. And there's not been enough consideration to how will the crowd respond and how will that impact players? How many leaders do we need to sign to make that happen? And how quickly can things turn up here, and can that then impact what happens on the pitch? That was a lot, but I'll throw it back to you.
Yeah, I agree. I think the Miguel Delaney quote is good. I think recruitment sort of gets a bit of a buy sometimes, I think, because rightly or wrongly, you don't really know whether it's been a good transfer window for 6-12 months minimum sometimes, whereas you very quickly see a team not performing and you know it's the manager's fault because they're on the hook. I think I've said before, I had alarm bells ringing when we appointed Russell Martin, obviously, first of all, like we've said before, but when it felt like we just started recruitment then, and rightly or wrongly, bringing in the first two players who are players that Russell Martin and his coaching staff have worked with before, they know, they're friendly with, that sets a precedent of we haven't really planned here as a club overall. Yeah. Rightly or wrongly, that's what it looks like. You can't escape that.
But there was a real pivot away, Adam. There was a real pivot away from, part of that's because there's new ownership, right? But this wasn't a transfer window that was months and months in the planning. Kevin Thelwell alluded to that when he spoke about why they went so heavily to the English market. But again, that begs the question of, can you, the list of what has gone wrong that I'll come on to, can you get all of that right in this time pressure when you're going for a big, bold idea? Or do you need to drip feed it in?
You can't. No, not at all. So we can debate the merits of it, but I think looking at it logically, as we've said many times before, some of these people have been in or around the club since January in various guises. I don't think it's acceptable is the wrong word. I don't think it's fair to just start it on the 1st of June from a standing start. I think there's many upfront preparations that can be done, discussions with scouts in the club to say this is the approach that we're going to take moving forwards as a club for 3 years, not just for a manager. It looks to me like the vast majority is manager-led recruitment. The parallels with Michael Beale are maybe not quite there in terms of every single player will have a link back to me, but it looks closer to it than maybe last year, for example. Migoma, someone he worked with, Miovski, someone he wanted, Harry Darling, Connor Cody, Raksaki were all mentioned as players that Russell Martin knew, liked, tried to sign before, did have before. It won't be far off 7, 8, 9, which is well over 50% of the players there. So I agree with your point in general. This is the best way to turbocharge it. Personally, as we've said before, we should have planned for the next 3 years in this window. We shouldn't have planned for getting the best possible start with a manager. They are especially a manager in this environment that a large part of people didn't want, in my opinion. Trying to turbocharge that and failing, to me, is more riskier than, okay, well, we're going to bring in the right players and the right characters that play for Rangers. If this manager gamble, which it was, if this manager gamble doesn't work, then okay, but we're going to have a good base of players there that we can then go forwards and build with. Now, I do think we might have a good base of players there.
Yeah.
I think I've been saying for the last 4 years in a row that a new manager coming in might get more out of these players. It would be great if that could actually start happening at some point. So I do think it's a bit of a false view at the minute of some of the players. Some have barely played 100 minutes of football. Some have obviously been in and out of the team, as we know. I do think there is a good base there, but I think if we were looking at the window, and if we assume now that the priority was, let's bring in players that can help Russell Martin get a really fast start, that's great. For me, the priority should have been, let's bring in the type of characters, the type of players, the type of skill sets that we as a club want for the next 2 to 3 years. So maybe both things have happened there, and it's a little bit unfair just now. I guess we'll only really tell in the next six months or so.
Yeah, so it almost feels as if you've tried to do too much too soon across the board, right? So if you have, like, for example, you're right, Russell Martin was not a popular appointment, and that just does matter up here, where the crowd are so close to the club, and that feeds onto the pitch and in the stands, and new players who come up and then are asked to play tactics, but playing a tactical style which provokes a lot of risk, and requires bravery and requires buy-in from the crowd. You know, at the weekend, Adam, when Rangers have that goal wrongly disallowed, that's when you need the crowd on side, right? That's when you need the crowd to go, now we're gonna take you over the line. But when you lose 6-0 away at Bruge, you lose the moderates. So what we're trying to say, I think, is that all of these things combine, and to completely overhaul recruitment and to completely overhaul a player's playing style and do that all at once, unless you do it perfectly, it's going to be quite difficult to get the idea off the ground. Maybe in hindsight, what you should have done, and we'll come on to maybe later in the podcast, what if someone like you or I, upon reflection, is there things that we disagree with, our own opinions a few months on. But should it have been a case of, right, there's so much to do, so we are going to appoint a manager that is more just less radical, is less of a radical overhaul, even for players who, you know, speak to people this time last year, that the amount of tactical work and training was very minimal compared to the amount of information they have to take on now is huge. So should there be more of a buffer zone, where you see Tony Bloom does this a lot with his clubs, where they almost get the recruitment right first, instill a manager who quote unquote knows the leaks, and then go for the big bold idea. So I want to look, therefore, Adam, at like what has gone wrong, because it's not just Russell Martin has made some bad decisions and therefore Rangers have won no games, right? There's a few different categories. Do you want to jump in there quickly before I move on?
Yeah, sorry, just on that Amarim thing before you move away from it.
Yes.
Like I said, I do have a little bit of sympathy for that position, because this is the thing that you excel in, apparently, in terms of the shape, etc. Moving away from that is a bit of a risk, and everybody's the same. Like we hear lots of, everybody's got a philosophy. That quote from Jose Mourinho that keeps getting thrown about Twitter as if he's some adaptable genius. He's the reason that Jose Mourinho has been sacked all the time and has only won one trophy in 9 years is because he couldn't adapt to the demands of modern football, and other managers dealt with it better. So the irony of that is amusing. But on the Amarim one, as an example, I've got less sympathy there because they've spent close to 300 million quid in the last two transfer windows. So even though it's Manchester United, even though there'll be a tax there, good scouting could absolutely turn that team into something serviceable. Top 8, top 10, maybe. Players signed to suit his squad. I don't have much doubt in my mind about that. What they've done is brought in a wing back in January, and then brought in 3 forwards essentially in the transfer window. But all the other issues that they've got still remain. So I've got a little bit less sympathy there, because he has had nearly a year and it is blatantly not working, and he's been backed, I think, to a decent degree in the market, which is a little bit different to here, I guess. But
But also then, like, Amorim probably should have just got rid of Bruno Fernandes, who's really good, but like doesn't have a role in that system. You get 100 million in for him or whatever, stupid money, and you sign Belieber instead of, and then or just keep him in the front three, right? And then don't spend all that money where you've actually got quite a good player. So we're tangenting, but the point is that all these things externally impact the pitch. To take it back to Rangers, what has gone wrong so far? This isn't about recruitment, because we need to do other. That merits a whole podcast in and of itself. But the recruitment has questions, as most recruitment will after a month, and when so much has had to be done in a short space of time. But you're right, a lot of money has been spent. And the big question I had coming out of that was, has there been a spine of the squad signed? And I don't think there has. You have nearly £4 million on Manny Fernandes, who's not in this squad at the weekend, and John Souttar, who struggled, is still starting. Have you signed a spine of the team and a new leadership group? I don't think you have personalities to take on this challenge. And I think James Tavernier's comments after the game, when he effectively said, look, it's a dressing room with a lot of young guys in it, paraphrasing what he said. And to play in this type of environment, you need... That's why I think Nico Raskin is so popular, because you need people who visibly take on responsibility. So has the recruitment been good enough? The tactics. This is why I use this quote here in my article, speaking about Man United and Rangers. Now, I'm conscious that Man United haven't had a good start to the season. But watching that game, Adam, United were just shelling it forward. The crowd loved it, right? If you go back to when Rangers lost 3-0 at home to Bruges, and John Souttar and... or 3-1 at home, and John Souttar and Nasser Giga are trying to bait the press at 3-0 down, and they look uncomfortable, and the crowd is just furious.
Yeah.
Brendan Rodgers last year had to do a press conference. I think Celtic had just beaten St Mirren at home, and he kind of went on the offensive against the crowd, and he was like, look, it's too impatient. Yeah. We're changing the point of attack. It's not easy to do this. That's the Celtic crowd who have seen it work, are arguably more amenable to that style of play. So I don't think there's been enough due diligence to the fact that a manager is a salesman to the players to convince them it can work, to the crowd to convince them to buy in. And if you don't have buy-in from the crowd, and if the tactical approach that you're going to take is really radical, again, if you don't get it perfect early on, you have doubts from the players and the crowd. I'm going to work through these all, then come back to you to see what you think on it. The environment, culture shock. That is what I think this has been right across the board. How do other external decisions impact things like Nico Raskin and not having a number 6, which I think is partly why Rangers have changed shape since that Bruges game. There's also a pervading sense of missed opportunity at the moment, because Celtic have been in crisis themselves, but yet Rangers have not been strong enough to strike when they're weak yet again. And also, finally, adaptation period, Adam. The comment that I think has been pretty indefensible is Russell Martin said after the St Mirren game, normally we're only a couple of games in by now. Everyone knew you wouldn't be. Everyone knew you wouldn't be, right across the board. Everyone knew you had 8 must-win games from in August alone. But by that point, the damage could be done. Again, that is the uniqueness of this club. If it was going to be difficult to go fully for Martin's ideas early on, as at Southampton, I think he was only in September that things really clicked in that championship season. Wasn't enough due diligence given to the fact that, look, will we have lost players of the fans by the time things should, in theory, be clicking? So that's the 4 kind of factors alongside tactics, recruitment tactics, environment, adaptation period, that I think directly feed into results. Is there anything you want to pick up from there that jumps out in particular?
Yeah, just I guess the adaptation, I think, is the big thing. Like you said, not a surprise. Shouldn't be a surprise. It's not easy to do, because we need to start our work essentially a month before most other teams come back. In theory, you might think that almost gives you an easy start and a free picket at the market, but it doesn't always work that way. Teams have been laying the groundwork for a while. Just because you're interested in a player doesn't mean you're going to bid the next day, but there can be unspoken agreements that a player will go on the 1st of July for PSR reasons or anything like that. But it just always seems to be a surprise for us every year. The hope was that it wouldn't have been a standing start, as we've said, with the hierarchy above. The hope was a manager coming in the summer meant that there was lots more time to work on principles and all that sort of stuff. Didn't really happen. I think I said at one point between the Gasama signing and Majowski, I guess the only permanent signing was Oliver Antman.
Mm-hmm.
And Migoma and Moore as kind of PL loans in 7 weeks. So
Mm-hmm.
basically, the crux of your pre-season. You got some business done early, which was supposed to turbocharge things. Didn't really work. Baffled by the Manny Fernandez signing if they're not going to play him, but also baffled by the amount of money that felt like a 1.5 million max type
Yeah.
signing. Have no idea what happened with that. But you try and give it a bit of time. But the adaptation period is the thing. Why was it a big surprise? Why, if we have interest in our players and players make it clear that they would like to go, I guess in the Igaman case primarily, it sort of feels like we're a little bit naive, and we'll just wait until Leo give us a bid. We won't go out there and be proactive and say, here's a price that we'll accept that will allow us to do what we need to do. So I think this transfer window looks pretty similar to some of the ones I've seen before, where we probably need to get some players out, and I understand that, but there's ways to do that, I guess. And there's also ways to utilize the funds a bit better. All through the summer, it was, oh, we need a striker, we need a striker, we need a striker, but we can't until someone leaves. And I get that, but we were stockpiling centre halves when we still had 4 at the club, and various other things there that don't quite tally up. So there's been no consistency, I guess, in that. But that comes into the adaptation period. It shouldn't be a surprise that ideally we would like to have the vast majority of our players in 2 weeks before the season starts at a minimum to give us a bit of time going. Yes, it's unrealistic. Yes, other players will come and wait, but will come later on in the window. Some players won't leave, etc. But given the amount of money that we've now spent in the window and the apparent 20 million net spend, which I don't know where that came from. I think that must have been a misspeak. It feels like we could have dealt with that spine on day one of the transfer window if we needed to. It doesn't feel like we had to horse trade and wait until the last 2 days of the window to bring in a left-footed centre-half and a striker or two that can take us forward. So that adaptation period, I guess, just bleeds into everything, even notwithstanding the, as you mentioned, it's just a couple of games for most teams, and we've played 6 or 7 at that point. Shouldn't be a surprise.
Yeah, but and again, I guess the pushback might be that look, there's Rangers couldn't sell Ligaman up to a point, and there's been so many players to bring in and so many players to get rid of, and that is absolutely true. It's a difficult environment to operate in. But again, you knew that, and if you knew that there was going to be so much change, is this a manager who can hit the ground running with that and gain the necessary time? Is that Manny Fernandez signing and the money committed to that? Is that a wise idea when you need players who can go away and perform at Bruge or whatever these must-win fixtures are? On adaptation period, the comment that comes to mind, I don't know if you remember Michael Beale speaking about this. Rangers went away to Porto, I think, and was that Gerrard's second season when they drew 1-1? I think it was. And he spoke about how in the lead up to the first season, they were pretty defensive and they kind of tried to turn defences away from home and maybe do them a bit of disservice. But that Porto game, which is when Barisic scores, they score a brilliant goal, Kent off to Barisic, Morelos at the back post, I think, with a cross. And I think what Beale said was, we decided it needed to be more about us. We couldn't just... To improve in the league, we couldn't do 2 different things. We needed to be braver on the ball in Europe too. But that was done after a period of adaptation. And had Rangers tried to play out against Porto away in Gerrard's first season, it would have been an absolute nightmare because they didn't have the defensive resolve and the idea wouldn't have got off the ground. Patrick Stewart said, infamously, I think at this point, you've got to build the plane while flying, and Rangers' idea hasn't got off the ground. Is that fair? That's what kind of comes up to me on adaptation period, that if all these things were happening, you knew it was going to be kind of tumultuous in the transfer market. You knew that Martin probably needed the window closed, as he said, to to really get things clicking, August is going to be really difficult. I want to move on, Adam, to something you wrote about what is it like the crux of this conversation, which is Bruge away, the nadir. Because up until that point, okay, Rangers have Pilsen at home where they play really well and you can see the ideas, but that's the only real 90-minute performance. Panathinaikos has some good stuff. The fullbacks playing off the number 6 that hasn't been seen enough since. Motherwell, again, some good moments, but then a kind of crazy second half where Rangers should lose. The games keep coming thick and fast. Rangers are sticking religiously to this 4-3-3. And then Bruges away, which is the nadir. And it's what did Russell Martin at Southampton, right? Is that they conceded so many goals playing out. And that game felt like so naive to me that Rangers didn't shut up shop at 1-0. I've gone on about it religiously, but I will continue to do so. There is no value in what they did in trying to keep Danilo on and Asgard. And there's one goal that Gassam isn't tracking his man because he's not fullback. There's one goal that Lyle Cameron loses out against a player about set two times his height. What Rangers should have done for me is right away go 5-4-0. It's going to be painful. Okay, maybe it's a little bit humbling to do it after 8-9 minutes, but you don't then have that nadir of, this is just a complete capitulation, which could have been 10-0. And that's why I think this conversation, Adam, isn't necessarily that we're having. It's not necessarily like, passing football doesn't work or possession football doesn't work or you can't have a manager who has a philosophy. For me, this has been a loss for how to embed a philosophy. It's been a loss for how you do it, right? It's not been a case of this cannot work. It's that right across the board, the circumstances have not been right. The decision-making has not been right to do that. And Bruges was a perfect example of that. I'll read this quote and I'll throw it back to you. You've said, the nadir came with the 6-0 humiliation to Club Bruges, which could and arguably should have been 10. Beyond the scoreline, the appearance appears to have completely rattled Martin's confidence. Until that point, he seemed scarily positive in front of the media, full belief in what he was doing, that it would click like it did, in his opinion, at all of his previous clubs. Since then, the style against Celtic and Hearts has been unrecognisable. Deserved benching of the first 2 summer signings appears to have coincided with the principals taking a back seat. Players like Rothwell and Aarons were candidates to help turbocharge embedding a style of play. In reality, both have been desperately poor. Ideas do not always equate to execution. I will throw it back to you on that.
So yeah, I think that's kind of what I mentioned in my opening ramble. I think me and you could say, "Oh, this might work in Scotland." I'm not going to speak for you, but I have absolutely no idea how to execute that or get players to buy into that or a club to buy into that. But I could say, yeah, we need to create chances. Here's what we think are the high value areas for scoring goals. Here's how we should press. Here's how we should attack various avenues, etc. But it just exists in a bubble. It's just us talking. We are not coaches and managers. The best managers, I think, get their ideas across in a simple way. They don't necessarily have simple ideas, but they get them across in a way that makes players buy in, makes fans buy in, make clubs buy in. And I think this clearly was the plan. Rothwell as the number 6, Aarons as the right back, who can bring inside, safe possession, can help out in that way and help with a secure build up. That was clearly the plan for those two to be the main components of build up. And it just comes back to my wider piece. They've both been terrible. I get that, but what squad have you built then? Because if your whole style of play is majority dependent on these 2 players, one of who is a loan, it might be a good idea to bring in other options that can do what they need to do as a priority, just in case they get injured or they're rubbish or they look terrified. In Aaron's case, what was the plan? I guess if that was the plan, then great. But now we're seeing Conor Barron playing as number 6, and rightfully we're not asking him to play as a playmaker that can build through the lines, because he can't do that. He's a bit more energy and aggression. Raskin was in there as well, who's probably a mix of both and probably could do it to a decent enough degree, but has been blown out the water. Diomandi's been in there a little bit as well, hasn't he? Maybe not as the number 6 playmaker, but certainly in the defensive areas as well. It just looks muddled, really. So it very quickly. And the only thing I can think is the Bruges result spooked him for sure, but then the character, mentality, fitness of these players in particular is clearly not what they thought it was. Execution, whatever. It's clearly not. The players are clearly not doing what the manager wants, because these two players have shown they are capable of doing that at other clubs. Therefore, coming up here, it can only be their character, mentality, adaptation, or they're just not good enough to do it. There's nothing. I don't really blame the manager in that sense, because I think that's maybe what he thought he was getting. But what I would say is, when they've shown they can't deliver it, there's no backups that can do it either. Therefore, your whole thing is dead in the water.
It's another conversation, but Iraola, who's like, by all accounts, Man City want next. I spoke the other day about how he's the assistant in recruitment because he's not an expert, and a lot of managers still want to have a big voice in it, and generally, I think that, as you say, it's a complete other science, but that is a different topic. But yeah, for me, Bruges, there's a breaking point for everything, and that game could have been 10-0. But the breaking point, I think, from the in-game decision making was way too late. It's at 5-0 down that Rangers go damage limitation when it should be 1 or 2, and that's why a manager is a salesman. If you're a player and you're being asked to buy into these ideas, and it requires bravery, and it actually requires a lot of uncomfortable receiving the ball in difficult areas. It requires you to sometimes, you've got to be a brave man to sit with your studs on the ball and beta press at Ibrox when you've got 50,000 impatient people around you. The breaking point of that just came too late. Subsequently, there's been a bit of a shift, which we'll come on to. We used this example earlier of how Guardiola changes so much, and against Amorim, who isn't changing, and his philosophy is more embedded to an actual formation. A few years ago, it would have been inconceivable that Man City are playing with a big man up top and a goalkeeper in goals, who's not Ederson, brilliant with the balls at his feet. And football is shifting, and again, this is a different conversation, but last season in the Premier League, the 3 promoted teams, Southampton, Ipswich and Leicester, especially Southampton and Ipswich, tried to play. And we're like, okay, we've got here doing this, so we can't change. This season, Leeds, Burnley and Sunderland are basically just defending. And Leeds have scored 1 goal, I think. Burnley had the best defence in the Championship last season, and have tried to do things very differently to what they did when they came up under Vincent Kompany, because they realised the value in that is not what it was a couple of years ago. We've just got to survive first. Even Spurs going for Thomas Frank after Postecoglou. So there is, I think, a bit of a shift happening in football that then you see Guardiola copy too, in that he's winning the Manchester derby with less than 50% of the ball. How has Martin changed? A little bit, but why has it been too late? And then why does it, as you say, abandon the very principles that you've kind of died on the hill of? This is kind of what Rangers pass network should have looked like, I think. I'll make that full screen for a second, with fullbacks narrower than wingers, with 2 number 8s and 1 number 6, with the wide rotations. That's Motherwell on the opening day of the season. What we've seen since, Adam, is this, which is let me just bring that back up. Where is it? There we are. I know it's not playing ball. There we are. Is a bit more of a 4-2-3-1, right? So you have Diamandi's higher than Connor Barron here, but you have a different build-up shape, which we'll show in an example just before we finish. You don't have an out-and-out number 6 because you don't have anyone who can do that. Then there's a knock-on effect, and we'll come on to discuss this knock-on effect. So there has been a little bit of a shift, and it led to Rangers conceding much fewer chances against Celtic, but also creating basically nothing. And In the 15 minutes at the weekend, they started in this shape at the weekend, more of a 4-2-3-1, a 3-4-3 in the ball. In the 15 minutes that they went back to a 4-3-3 with Rothwell, who I thought had a good 15 minutes, they created like 50% of their chances on the day because they were back doing what they have trained clearly all pre-season. But it just feels strange that they've become less dogmatic and shifted it at this point instead of going like, oh, we better just be resolute against the ball away at Bruges. Do you know what I mean? And then maybe the nadir doesn't happen.
And I think the irony is he's done what everyone was asking him to do, in a weird way. Again, you could argue it should have been that way from the start, and I do agree, like you've said, it should have been that way from the start. Let's go with 2 or 3 really clear principles, 2 or 3 really clear attributes in terms of the players. Let's get a number 6 that can build play, and let's focus on that fully. Let's get a winger that can do whatever we need to do, and let's get a centre half and a striker. Go with those, and then sort of build around it. It's whether we're talking about building the tactical setup or building the squad, it's kind of the same thing. In terms of maybe little and often is probably best. But to go so heavy. And again, it's the analogy is probably the same with the 49ers. I think people had said in the summer, maybe it is an idea to go with a bit of a halfway house of a manager and bring someone in who is pragmatic, but can attack. Might not necessarily be the man that gets you where you want to be and be the saviour and all that sort of stuff. But while there's so much flux going around, to build the squad, get someone who can get the best out of a collection of players, and then look to embed it in year 2 potentially, or maybe even year 3 or year 4, depending on how things go. And I guess you could probably sum that up here. They've went right in from the start, which is admirable. But then paring it back like this just to me makes it worse. I've said that before. It's just it's like, okay, so that's failed. So now you're paring it back. I understand it, but the what's the word? The optics of it are wrong, or not wrong, but the optics of it are around the wrong way. If you just started to build and introduce some of these things in when new players signed and explained it in that way, we never had a focal point that could hold. We never had a focal point that could hold the ball up. Now Majovski's here, we'll go direct a little bit more. These are easy wins to say. It's sort of bread and butter things. But yeah, the paring back now is probably reality biting. We know it's too little, too late, regardless of that. But I guess everybody's biding their time, like I said. But yeah, for me, I just felt a little bit like if you're going to be so hard and so heavy on it when you don't have the players, then to pare it back when you've pretty much got the squad that you have got the squad that you're left with. It just feels a little bit at odds, and that's where I think the fear factor is coming in, unfortunately.
Yeah, so listen, we're going to kind of bring things together with just one example from the weekend, but it's a big conversation. We've hopefully not went too much around the houses, but in essence, to kind of summarise it, Adam, I think we're discussing that have Rangers done this backwards a little bit? Right? Have they appointed someone really radical in a really difficult time who has difficult circumstances to do the job? And now, after that, Bruge nadir has maybe adapted a little bit. I think you'll go back to the 4-3-3, just go for it against Hibs. And that's another thing. It's been when Rangers have played domestically, apart from maybe over the minutes against Motherwell, you've not seen that relentless, aggressive intensity in their football and the tempo of it. Which after half-time against Hearts, when Rothwell came on, it started to look a bit better. But how does this all combine? How do all these difficult circumstances combine? This is what I want to talk about, just to finish, Adam, in relation to the concession against Hearts. Because again, Rangers get themselves 1-0 down and make it a far more difficult game than it maybe could have been based on how they started that second half. They changed the shape for me for 2 reasons. Number one, because of the Bruges nadir, because they need to be stronger against the ball, and they eventually compromise when they have that horrific defeat. Okay, and that means that they don't concede much against Celtic, even if it's a missed opportunity. Yeah. But they also have to change build-up shape because they've not got a number 6. Because Nico Raskin's in the stands because of that whole other situation, which again feeds onto the pitch. Joe Rothwell's on the bench, whether that's fitness, whether it's an inability to cover big spaces off the ball. As you say, the man who was signed to usurp Raskin and take that role then doesn't start. Conor Barron can't do that, I don't think. And you saw that after half-time. And Diomande lacks a defensive nous to do that, as you saw for failing to track Shanklin for the first goal and giving away the penalty for the second. So there's one knock-on effect. Then you have to play Gassama and Asgard on the right because you've not really signed a right winger. Antman probably is, but
Only
maybe struggles. Yeah, maybe has struggled against a low block. So as a result of that, because of your squad building, you probably take your two most dangerous attackers, Gassama and Asgard, and you play them on the right. And part of that is also because Magoma, who's doing this kind of overlapping role on the left back, Tavernier probably can't do that anymore because it's not 2020, and Max Aarons has been shot in confidence, and that was shown with the Bruge game. So again, a knock-on effect of, because of maybe your recruitment, you have to shift around your two most dangerous attacking players. Nasgard and Gassam clearly were that in the second half. You then kind of abandon your principles in your first phase of build-up. And what I mean by that is because you're not doing a 4-3-3 with a number 6 and the fullbacks, you have to try and build up in the middle in a different way, which I'll come on to show in a second, which is how you concede the first goal. All these things are combining basically when you've compromised. So just to show that, you can see it's kind of a box midfielder, Adam. Mikey Moore pushes inside with Barron and Diomande at the base midfield. Tavernier tucks infield. Magoma goes wide, left back. Gassama receives on the right, but because it's not his natural side, he has to go backwards. He can't, he's not in his ideal situation where if you had a left footer on the right here, you can maybe push forward. If you look at the chance leading up to, the moment where Asgard and Diomande kind of get in one another's way from that Rothwell cross, if people watch that move back, that is a perfect example of probably what it should look like with a winger on their natural side, a number 6 playing a bounce pass to create the overload, the 2v1 in the build-up. But anyway, Tavernier's then in this position. He has to try and play into Connor Barron, who's playing with his back to goal, not his natural situation. Miovski's trying to run behind. They're still trying to do this principle of a third man run. And what I mean by that is, if in the first phase, that normally means the someone plays to the number 6 and the number 6 plays to the fullback. Tav and Rothwell against Panathinaikos to create the free man and arrive into the next phase. Here they're trying to do it with the striker and the number 8, but it's not really what they've worked on. Miovski's trying to run behind. Barron doesn't look natural. It's not his ideal situation. So the move breaks down. Yes, it should be a handball. Diomande and Barron are both higher, but also, as we'll come on to, Diomande then is in the number 6 position as he is for the penalty and loses his man too cheaply just because that's not really his game. So again, I'm conscious we're trying to cover a lot of points here, but what I'm trying to show is it's not just a case of the tactical setup is bad, or it's a case of how do you play the politics so that you get fans on side and start Nico Raskin. How do you not have the nadir against Bruges by adapting a little bit earlier so that you can stick to your principles? How do you recruit effectively so you're not playing your best players out of position? It's a combination of things is how Rangers have got here. That's my TED talk over. I'll throw back to you before we close.
I agree. People hate that, don't they? That it depends. You must have a binary position. But it does. A lot of football is about luck as well. No one ever really seems to. No one ever really seems to accept that as a reason. The tactics were an issue early in the season for a large majority of people. He has completely changed that now, and the tactics are still an issue. So the people who were calling for him to adapt and be more conservative, etc., are equally as incorrect as the people that were saying he should double down on his principles, in my opinion, because it's proven that hasn't got any better there. So that's why it can't be that binary. That's why it has to depend on a lot of things that you've outlined there. Also, off-field things as well. On-field things for sure. And I think we said on these shows, there's been some really, really weird decisions. Back to Max Aarons playing left back when there was 2 left backs in the building at that point. Again, if those 2 left backs are completely incapable of doing what you want to do, and you've called that really, really early, probably prioritise a left back, I would say, rather than a loanee coming in as the only signing there. Then Jeffy coming in as well. When Aaron's had to move over as well, it's just mixed messaging. That's just one example. There's plenty of them before you even get to Raskin, Egaman, Tavernier, Dow. All these things add up to a manager looking weak, looking like he's not quite sure what he's doing, looking like we only see the outcome on the pitch is fine. Okay, but the outcome on the pitch looks like an absolute riot. So at times, and the selections that you're making and how you're treating some players don't look consistent either. So that's why we look at the outcome, because the messaging coming out is not clear. What we're seeing on the pitch is not clear as well, as we've said, because of the switching tactics. So yeah, I think it sums it up nicely. There is a lot there. In these stills, there are players playing out of position for sure, or playing where they're not most suited. And I think all of that adds up to the shapeless mess that we see at the weekend. For me, I think you can still have your principles and you can still have how you want to play, but you can put square pegs in square holes a bit more than we have. I don't think, again, it's not that binary. It can't be one or the other. It can't be, this is my style, this is how I play. Therefore, Conor Barron is going to be my 6 and Jerry Gassama is going to be my wing back on the right side. That doesn't make sense in any universe at all. So there's more that can be done. There's a lot more that can be done outside of he should stop passing out from the back. I think, because passing out from the back is only an issue when you can't pass to someone. I think I said this the other day to one of my friends when they were complaining about it. I was like, all big teams, it goes back to the original point, all big teams get given the ball. All big teams need to pass out from the back. All big teams need to face a low block. You can't change that. You can't control that. You can lump the ball and have 50-50s. I don't think I fancy Jerry Gassama or Danilo up against most SPFL centre-halves in the air. Therefore, that seems like a bad tactic. The basis is we have to pass out from the back. We don't have to do it all the time and in the poor ways that we do. But ultimately, you have to have someone to pass to. If they're standing there passing between each other, the players aren't moving to make themselves available. The wingers aren't staying high to stretch play. The centre mids aren't going wide or coming in. The number 6 isn't making himself available often enough, because if they were, they wouldn't really be doing it. That is not what they want to do, is just pass it about. They're passing it about to wait for space. If space never comes, they're kind of limited in what they can do. So it's a whole symptom, it's a cause and effect thing. All we see is passing out from the back doesn't work. We just pass it together and then we punt it long anyway. Let's just punt it long. But then we lose the ball then too. So for me, it's a whole big thing, and each part of it is broken.
Well, that was quite cathartic. Let's leave it there, Adam. In summary, I think it's an example of, if you're going to go with a radical idea, you need to sell it well. You need to create the right environment for a difficult idea to work. I suspect, if I was a betting man, that Rangers will go back to a 4-3-3 at the weekend and be quite aggressive and just go for it, because they have to. There's nothing left to really hold on to. We shall see. We'll be back at some point soon to talk more about Rangers tactics and everything in between. If you like this video, please, you've muted yourself. Did you have a good point to make?
I was just, I can't wait to come back and talk about this again in a couple of weeks.
Yeah, exactly. We're also on the Heart and Hand Network doing Tactics Talk too. Make sure to read Adam's piece, which will be in the description. And if you like this video, please subscribe. About 50% of you watching don't subscribe, so it would make my job easier if you could do that. Really appreciate it. We will speak to you soon. Until then, enjoy the rest of your Thursday, and goodbye for now.